My name is Michael Lind. I'm the Policy Director of the Economic Growth Program at the New America Foundation. And our guest today is Ralph Gomory, Research Professor at NYU and President Emeritus of the Sloan Foundation. We're here to talk about the importance of manufacturing and the relationship of the company to the country. Thank you, Ralph Gomory. What do you mean by the conflict between country and company?
Let me give you a concrete example. Why did IBM sell its PC business to China? I was in IBM for 30 years, but I'd left by the time this happened. But basically, the PC business was a tough business, profit margins very thin, okay? It wasn't a profitable business. And American companies, including IBM, today are essentially run to generate profit. Okay? And by the way, in spite of what people will tell you, that wasn't the case 30 years ago. They had several things they were trying to do, of which profit was one. So selling the thing to China made sense. It wasn't worth much to them, but to the Chinese, it was wonderful. It was a foothold, more than a foothold, a huge step forward into having a PC industry in China. So you have different motivations. Those countries want to have GDP. They want to have a lot of value created in the country, gross domestic product. Our companies are focused on profit. They are not necessarily linked. You can have a very productive industry, but because it's very competitive, the profit margins are paper thin, and we say to hell with it.
Well, what changed the approach of American management towards profit, in your opinion?
Well, in my opinion on this, and I was in some sense a spectator, I saw it happening. Right? If you go far enough back when I was involved in those things, the CEOs had a lot on their minds, okay? After all, they're humans, and they live with their people every day. They live with their customers. Customers can complain or they can cheer. Right? They live with their communities, okay? And so those were really the human pressures on them day to day. And then the board of directors would show up, every 3 months. They would have an agenda. They would be happy as long as the company made reasonable profit. Okay? But when the financial institutions really got into it, which was in the early 80s, I think, that all changed. They decided that they wanted more emphasis on profit, which is what mattered to the institutions, okay? Mm-hmm. Okay? They didn't care what the company did as long as the stock price went up and all that stuff. So they adopted a very simple strategy, and it was conscious. They talked about aligning the interests of the CEO with the interests of the shareholder. That has become so embedded now that most people think it was always that way, but it wasn't. And so they gave them essentially huge numbers of stock options. And they had to be huge, right? Because the natural human inclination of these people was to work for these more human goals, for the people they knew, and so forth. But, if you give them enough money, you can get...
I think that's an important point that people don't realize. Yeah. For the first 150, nearly 200 years of the United States, the corporation was chartered for a public purpose.
Yes.
That was the idea. It was sort of a utility. Yeah. And the price of raising private capital was giving a moderate return to the investors.
That's well put.
But it was not seen as something done to enrich the investors at the expense of society. It was creating something for society.
No, I think we need to reassert the notion that corporations exist to serve society and not to enrich a thin upper crust of it. And we've lost that. And we lost it by tying the management to the stock price.
Now, you've argued that the orthodoxy, saying that the U.S. just benefits unequivocally from deindustrialization and from free trade, that this orthodoxy is based on a misreading of the classical economic theory of comparative advantage.
Well, I'm not sure that there's so many misunderstandings bundled together in the free trade issue that I don't want to isolate
But you argue that the conventional use of the term comparative advantage is mistaken.
Well, it is very often misused because it basically says that we should only do the things in which we have a big comparative advantage, but that doesn't work out. Supposing we really, really were good at producing concert pianists, okay? I mean, just beat the world at it. Well, we could do that, but it wouldn't give us enough foreign exchange to buy much, right? So you can't, comparative advantage is something, but all the things that you have advantage in better add up to something very big if you want to import in a big way. And right now, we have a big trade deficit, which in itself sounds rather academic, right? But what it does mean, which is not academic, and I don't think we can get through this subject in such a short time, but I just want to make this point. It means that we are consuming more value than we create. Right? In other words, we import stuff, we use it. Right? We don't have anything to send in the other direction. So we are borrowing, and someday we'll have to repay. But the most serious thing is that we are living beyond our means. Right? And of course, that is not a reproach to the individual. That is a reproach to our government for allowing this to go on, for not taking steps to change it. Yes.
Now, President Obama, among others,
Yes.
has suggested that in order to be competitive with the Chinese and Indian workers, American workers need much more education. What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I think education is always a good thing, right? But I think education has to be matched by a job. Many, many years ago, I went to India, and our guide was essentially a PhD. Why was that? They didn't have any jobs for PhDs. Right? So if you want to create a lot of educated people, you also have to create the corresponding jobs.
And you have to supply them with the productive machinery.
Yes, but that's usually what makes a productive job. So I think we are actually saying the same thing. And so, yes, let's educate people more. But let's charge our corporations, with whom we don't charge with anything right now. Let us incent them and charge them with creating the jobs for these people. If we just train people and we don't have the jobs to exploit their skills, or we don't even give them the skills to match the jobs because the jobs are unspecified or away or gone, you'll just have a lot of unemployed, educated people. And that side needs to be added very consciously to the American direction. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Gomory.
Yeah.